Welcome back to CEO Money. I'm Michael Yorba, your host. Thanks for joining us. All right, today we're going to be talking with Ellen Wald, author of Saudi Inc. Ellen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Great. We can turn that music down. Thank you very much. All right, Ellen, tell me about your background. I mean, you grew up outside of Philadelphia, but you're a scholar at the Arabia Foundation, expertise in how policy wars, diplomacy, and stock market, oil pricing, and innovation impact the future of energy. That's a mouthful. I mean, give me some color on that.
So it's true, I'm a scholar. I have a PH.D. in energy history, actually, which is where this whole project got started. I was studying American and British oil companies in the Middle East in the 1940s and 50s, which is when I got into studying Aramco. And so this book is really kind of got started then, and then I decided to take it up to the present day and to really explore what makes Saudi Arabia tick. What are they after? What are their motivations? Which I think some people will be surprised about.
Well, they might. I mean, I recently saw what's going on with the prince running around the world and being a real diplomat, which is a little bit of a change to the previous policies from what I've seen. And then also, aren't they going to start exporting energy from their big, massive solar farms? And then they're going public. So it's a whole new world for these guys.
When we think about Saudi Arabia, I think one very prominent pundit put it like this a couple years ago. He said, well, they really can't do very much other than, drill holes in the ground and oil just comes out. And that's really the myth that I'm trying to change, and to show that the Saudis have always had a very good idea about what their oil industry is and how to be very strategic in thinking about where it's going, what they can get from it. And this goes back even to the 1930s and 40s when they essentially had nothing in the desert. They had almost no economy. They were not modernized, but they had a sense of where they wanted to go and what they needed to do to get there. And that brings us even today up to their massive solar projects. They're looking around and saying, look, we're in the energy business. We know how to run an energy company. Where is energy going? It's going solar.
Oh, so I get that. Let's talk about in the book a little bit because it's history of Aramco and Saudi Arabia. I wanted to find out. Give us some blow by blows of without having to give the entire book about where it leads you, how it goes, and then I also want to know what you think of the future is. I mean, you just mentioned yes, they're going to start, selling energy through solar panels, but there's more to it than that. That's just scratching the surface.
Yeah. The book starts with the beginning of Saudi Arabia and Aramco, which was originally an American company. It was owned by four American oil companies, Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and Texaco. And they were the ones who really went out in the desert and discovered oil in Saudi Arabia. This may seem surprising, but for some time people didn't think that there was oil in Saudi Arabia at all. They discovered it and they built the oil industry there. And over the years, they trained a lot of Saudis to work in this industry. They sent them to school. They became geologists, engineers, etc. And the Saudis also grew wealthy off of it, the Saudi government. And eventually, in the 1970s, the Saudis decided to buy the oil company from the Americans. And this is a big shift from what was going on mostly in other places in the Middle East. We were seeing all sorts of violent nationalizations, people just taking governments in the Middle East just taking oil assets, and the Saudis, instead, they bought it out. And once they bought it out, they turned the company from just a company that produces oil into a global energy conglomerate with assets and refineries and petrochemical plants that they own now all over the world. And that really brings us up to today and the future when they're talking about taking their company public.
Okay, talk to me about that.
Well, the initial public offering for Aramco was first announced by the Saudi Crown Prince. At that point, I think he wasn't the Crown Prince yet, but it was very controversial because national oil companies tend not to go public. They tend to be the property of the governments. But Aramco isn't like other national oil companies. It's very independent from the government. The government doesn't tell it what to do. The government is not involved in the finances. And over time, as this IPO kind of talk has gotten more and more traction, people have come to see the independence of Aramco. In fact, there were recently some financial documents that were leaked to the press that show that they're one of the most efficient and producing oil companies out there, and that they make a lot of money.
How is it that they can be more efficient than other people who have been in the industry for longer than them? I mean, what are they doing different that makes them more efficient, and thereby that IPO is really going to bullet if that's the case?
One of the things that they do very well is, one of the things is that they are blessed with oil resources that have been fairly easy to access. So that's definitely helped them have some of the lowest producing costs per barrel. But they've also made very strategic investments over the years that have helped that as well. They, in the 1990s, they invested in building a very large oil plant out in the middle of the desert, where previously they didn't think that they could actually access that oil in a profitable way. And they built that oil facility under budget and in less time than they'd allotted. And that kind of efficiency has really helped them maintain their very low cost of production. The other thing is that they're able to really squeeze value everywhere along the chain out of their oil. So they have deals with refineries that they are partial owners of in, say, China and Korea, where they're shipping these refineries their own crude oil, so they've got long-term contracts for that. Then they're making money in the refining stage, producing gasoline, jet fuel, whatever else is being made, and selling it. So they've very effectively gotten value everywhere along that chain.
All right. Now, in 73, we had an oil crisis. And since then, I think we've had like one other major one, but nothing like what happened in 73. That you make a point of that in your book. Bring that out.
In 1973 was a major shift for the oil industry. And part of it had to do with the fact that oil prices had been very low and very stable for many years. Oil was something like $2 a barrel around then. And it was coming to a point in the global oil market that supply and demand were very, very tight. And the United States could no longer increase its own production to accommodate for rising demand. And that meant that all the countries that had extra capacity, most of those were Middle Eastern countries and Venezuela. And they felt rightly that oil prices should be higher. But at that time, oil prices were really set by the companies that they were selling their oil to. And 1973 basically broke that chain. And it made the Middle Eastern countries able to set oil prices as they wished. And Saudi Arabia was a very integral part of this because they felt that oil prices needed to be higher, and they also wanted to be able to take control of their oil industry. And being able to set the price like this in conjunction with the rest of OPEC helped them to also then negotiate to control the company, and that made them even more money.
Got it. Ellen, let's do this. Let's take a small break, and on the other side, I want to get into I also want to ask you about peak oil and how that affects what's going on, but get into some of the other questions I may have for you on the way back. But before we go, how can somebody get your book?
It's available wherever good books are sold, as a friend of mine likes to say. You can find it on Amazon, hardcover, Kindle, and audiobook. Audiobook's also available on audio and Barnes & Noble.
All right. We'll be right back with Ellen Wald, author of Saudi Inc. EllenWald.com is where you can find it. All right. We'll be right back. You've been listening to CEO Money with Michael Yorba, and thanks for listening. Welcome back to CEO Money. I'm Michael Yorba, your host. Thanks for joining us. All right. We are talking with Ellen Wald, author of Saudi Inc. All right, Ellen, you've given me a lot to go on with this, but there's more to just economics in your book. You also cover politics. And I wanted to because there's a lot of question about how these politics are playing out now with what's going on with the Saudi Empire and how that interweaves with the economics. So being that you've done a great big study on this, you've written a wonderful book about it, I wanted to get your thoughts on where we are with the country, the regime, the Saudi regime, and how it's going to affect global economic policy and global political policies.
What we're seeing now with Saudi Arabia is that the country is really exerting itself in its region, and it would very much like to be a regional force, a force in the region. And we're certainly seeing it come up against Iran in a very strong way. Used to be that Iraq was really a big force, and other countries, Egypt, but Saudi Arabia is really pushing to become one of the more dominant political and economic forces. And part of that does bring it into conflict with Iran. And we're seeing that conflict very much playing out and affecting us around the globe. We're seeing Saudi Arabia and Iran kind of have these skirmishes in the Persian Gulf, and particularly in Yemen. We're seeing a lot of kind of diplomatic tiffs as well. And there are also some moves to indicate that the Saudis may be stepping up to challenge Iranian dominance in Lebanon and Syria.
How's that playing out? I mean, just give us your opinion. The world according to Ellen in the Middle East. How do you think this is going to play out? Are they going to end up being the total political dominating force and economic dominating force in the region, and everybody else is going to fall in line, or are we going to start seeing some bigger conflicts?
In the short term, no. The Saudis are really behind in this kind of race to dominate the region, and Iran had been laying the groundwork for this for a long time. They've got people on the ground in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, and the Saudis are kind of behind from that perspective. They haven't really tried to extend their political influence much outside of the Gulf region. But in the long term, we could see Saudi dominance. One of the things that they're really trying to do is diversify their economy. And it's a very ambitious project, and it'll probably fall short in several areas. But they are making real changes behind the scenes that we will see playing out in the long term.
Like?
Iran's economy, on the other hand, is not doing well, and certainly in the long term, we are going to see these economic problems showing.
What are the issues, or what are the changes that you see them making now that we'll see in the long term? What are they doing now that we don't know about?
What they're doing now, they are bringing in and attracting manufacturing businesses. So, for example, they are looking to bring in manufacturers to make new petrochemicals. They're looking to bring in an increase. They have a big aluminum plant there, and they're looking to increase that. They're looking to bring in Amazon to set up a data center. And a lot of these deals are not super splashy, but they are happening, and we are seeing the economic activity in Saudi Arabia. It will increase. It's not going to increase, today or tomorrow, but 10, 20 years down the line, we're going to see the effects of this as Saudi Arabia maybe has a strong manufacturing base. They're going to bring in Kalashnikov manufacturer as well.
Okay, so that brings, when you say Kalashnikov, you're talking about arms, right?
Yes.
Okay.
They would like to be a small arms manufacturing center.
Well, they buy enough of them. Why not?
Exactly. That's exactly their perspective on this.
Okay. What do you think that they're headed down the road so that they're going to become a bigger player on the equity scene? I mean, the crypto scene, the equity scene, the banking scene. Do you see them moving in that direction also?
They're definitely making a push into that sector. Part of the issue is that in the Gulf, Abu Dhabi and Qatar are really dominant in terms of banking and equities, but the Saudis are making a big push to expand their stock market. In fact, they recently were granted MSCI status, so we're definitely going to see more of that developing world, money flowing into the Saudi stock market. I think that the potential IPO of Aramco could also play into this. They want to list some of Aramco on their own local markets, and that could certainly raise the stature of Saudi markets.
Okay, and investment on a global scale, do you think that they're going to keep that pace? Because they're pretty aggressive right now.
Oh yeah, I mean they're looking to create a public wealth fund of about $2 trillion, I think, which would dwarf most other public investment funds. The problem is, their public investment fund, it's slow starting out, and they're making a lot of investments that most would see as very risky. They've said that they want to orient their public investment funds along the lines of Norway's, And they definitely need to make a lot more kind of stable investments in order to orient themselves along those lines. However, if they are going to do this, it would make them a major presence in the investing world.
We're going to need to end it there. But Ellen, thanks for being a guest on the show.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Ellen Wald, author of Saudi Inc., ellenwald.com, and you can get the book at any bookstore where your better books are sold. You've been listening to CEO Money with Michael Yorba. We'll be right back after this brief break with Markets to Watch and David Williams.